All right, everyone, welcome back. Ready to dive into another juicy topic. Today, we're tackling something that pretty much everyone in project management faces: conflict.
Yeah, it's kind of unavoidable.
Really. But the good news is, it doesn't have to spell disaster. We've got a ton of practical strategies to share, all based on some really insightful sources.
And I'm excited to jump in. I've definitely been in my fair share of project fires over the years, both as someone who studies conflict resolution and someone who's lived it firsthand.
The perfect combo. And speaking of combinations, one thing that really struck me from our research is that conflict isn't just one thing, right? It's not all the same.
Right. It'd be way too easy if it was.
For sure. So let's break it down. What types of conflict we might encounter in a project setting?
Well, our sources point to three main: task-based conflict, then there's interpersonal, and of course, we can't forget about resource-based conflict.
Okay, task-based. That seems pretty straightforward. Is that like disagreeing about deadlines? Or maybe the best way to approach a certain part of the project?
You got it. Say you and a teammate are going back and forth about the best strategy for an upcoming product launch. That's a classic example of task-based conflict. It's all about the what of the project.
Makes sense. All right, now interpersonal conflict. That one sounds a little trickier.
Yeah, it can be a bit more delicate. This one's all about the who, the personalities involved. Ever had that situation where you've got one team member who communicates exclusively in emojis
Oh, yeah.
and another one who novel-length emails?
Oh, I've seen that one go south so many times.
Exactly. Which is in communication styles, different personalities, those unspoken tensions. That's interpersonal conflict in a nutshell.
And sometimes those unspoken tensions can be the hardest to deal with. Okay, last but definitely not least, resource-based conflict. What's that all about?
Think of this. You're putting together the budget for a big project. You realize you're going to have to fight tooth and nail to secure funding for that new software you desperately need.
Been there.
Right. Resource-based conflict is all about those limited resources. It could be budget constraints, not enough team members to go around, even something as simple as fighting for a meeting room.
Oh, I've seen that one get ugly. It's amazing how all those different flavors of conflict can play out within a single project.
Absolutely. And it's not always a screaming match right from the get-go.
That's what really jumped out at me too when we were prepping for this, the idea that conflict has stages and it's not always this big dramatic blow up.
Exactly. Think of it like, I don't know, a volcano, maybe. Sometimes it's just this low rumble beneath the surface,
Simmering.
That's what we call latent conflict. It might not be obvious to everyone, but it's there, impacting how people interact, even in subtle ways.
Okay, so how do we spot this latent conflict? What are the warning signs that something's brewing before it, erupts?
It's all about those subtle cues. Maybe a team member who's normally really active in meetings suddenly goes silent. Or you start noticing a lot of eye rolls or heavy sighs when a certain topic comes up.
Oh, yeah, those are good.
Right. Those little shifts in behavior could be huge red flags.
So we've got these different types of conflict. We know they can simmer beneath the surface. But here's the thing. It's not as simple as picking a conflict resolution tactic at random, is it?
Not a chance.
The how of resolving conflict, it seems like it's hugely dependent on the context.
100%. It's like you need the right tool for the job. You wouldn't, I don't know, on a light bulb.
Definitely not my area of expertise.
Mine neither, but you get the idea. Our sources highlighted a few key context factors that I think are really helpful, like team dynamics, for example. If you've got a project lead who's disagreeing with a junior team member, that needs to be handled way differently than, say, a conflict between two colleagues at the same level.
Totally. Power dynamics can really change things.
For sure. Then there's the whole organizational environment. A company with a super formal hierarchical structure might call for a different approach than a company with a flatter, more collaborative vibe,
Absolutely. And we can't forget about the actual project itself, right? Like how much pressure everyone's under.
Oh, for sure. Tight deadlines, demanding stakeholders breathing down your neck, that just amps up the stress and can turn a tiny disagreement into a major meltdown.
And this is where it gets really interesting for me, the toolkit part. Our sources laid out a whole bunch of conflict resolution methods, and honestly, I'm geeking out a little bit to dig into them.
Let's do it. I think what's cool about this is that we're not just going to list them. We're going to really unpack each method. We'll talk about when it's most effective, but just importantly, we'll explore potential downsides to watch out for.
Because it's not enough to just have tools, use them right.
Exactly. Okay, so I want to start with maybe the most, I don't know, I guess you could say passive approach.
Sure, let's do it.
All right. So there's avoiding. And this isn't about just ignoring the problem completely. It can actually be a really useful approach for dealing with things that are honestly pretty minor, especially if addressing them head on could derail the whole project.
So it's about picking your battles.
Yes, picking your battles strategically. But a word of caution, if you're constantly using this approach, even for the bigger issues, it's kind of like just kicking a can down the road, you know?
Well, I know that one well. Eventually you trip and it's not pretty.
Right. Not pretty at all. Okay, what about accommodating? That one always sounds very
Yeah.
diplomatic.
You're trying to keep everyone happy.
Exactly. And it can be a really valuable tool, especially for like preserving relationships, maintaining a positive team atmosphere, you're prioritizing harmony, even if it means setting aside your own needs or preferences for the sake of the team.
But there's got to be a potential downside there, right? Like, if you're always the one accommodating, always putting your own needs on the back burner, I imagine that could lead to some resentment, maybe even burnout down the line.
You're absolutely right. It's all about finding that balance. Constantly putting yourself last can really throw off the team dynamic in the long run.
Okay, so we've got avoiding and accommodating. What about competing? That one sounds a lot more, I don't know, assertive.
Yeah, it definitely is. This approach is about, really advocating strongly for even pushing for your way to be the solution. It's not about being aggressive necessarily, but it is about making sure your voice is heard.
When would that be the most useful approach?
Think about those critical moments when you need a fast decision. Maybe there's some sort of crisis happening and there's just no time for a long, drawn-out discussion.
You need someone to take charge.
Exactly. Someone's got to take the lead. Now, that being said, overusing this really backfire. It can erode trust within the team, damage relationships in the long run, because it can create this win-lose environment, which is never healthy.
So, another one to use sparingly, strategically.
For sure. Okay, how about compromising? This one always feels like the classic middle ground.
Yeah, like meeting in the middle.
Exactly. It's all about finding a solution that everyone can live with, even if it means no one is getting exactly what they want. It's super valuable when you're short on time or if the issue at hand is causing a ton of friction.
I can see that. But I do imagine it's not always easy to actually find that perfect middle ground where everyone walks away feeling good about the outcome.
You're telling me. It can be a real challenge for sure. And that's where I think the next method really shines.
Lay it on me.
This one's all about collaborating.
Ooh, I like the sound of that one already.
Right. It's the dream team approach to conflict resolution.
Okay, I'm listening.
So it's about working together to find a solution that really does benefit everyone involved. And that takes time, it takes effort, and it definitely takes a willingness to truly listen to and understand different perspectives.
Sounds like it takes work.
It does. But the payoff can be huge. It often leads to the most creative, the most innovative, and the most sustainable solutions.
So it's about digging a little deeper, finding that win-win. Win. Love it. Okay, last but not least, we have negotiating. That one, to me, feels very structured, very strategic.
100%. It often involves, like, more formal discussions, sometimes even bringing in a neutral third party to kind of help facilitate the conversation. And it's really about, like, showing up with your objective, what you want, but also being willing to make concessions.
So it requires some flexibility.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But ultimately, it's all about working towards an agreement that everyone feels reasonably good about.
I feel like this approach would be super valuable when there are really complex issues at play or when the stakes are just really high.
Totally agree.
Wow, we covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
I feel like I've been to conflict resolution boot camp. What a fantastic toolkit.
And like with any good toolkit, the key takeaway here is that there's no magic bullet. No one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. Every conflict is unique.
Exactly. And understanding the why behind each of these methods, that's just as important as knowing how to use them.
So, listeners, I hope you've got your notebooks handy because there's a lot to unpack here. Seriously, though, I'd love for you to take some time to reflect on these different approaches. Maybe even experienced conflict in a project setting. Which method did you use? Did it work? Or, knowing what you know now, would you approach it differently?
And here's something else to chew on. We talked about all these different approaches, but what about the ethics of conflict resolution? Are there situations where one method might be more ethical than another? And how do you navigate those tricky situations where the best solution for the project might not be the most lots to think about.
So much to think about. But that's what we're here for. All right, collaborating or, competing or compromising, whatever the situation calls for.